Hi everyone. Dzień dobry, cześć. My name is Magda Bartkowska-Pasiut, and I'm a Polish-American writer from Gdańsk and from Western Massachusetts. Currently, I'm working on my first book, a memoir about immigrating to the US. Although I shouldn't say I'm currently working on it, as being home with 3 children during a pandemic is not really conducive to book writing. So I've been doing some other things instead, such as putting together this presentation about Ignacy Jan Paderewski, which I am very excited to share with you. So, what is the big deal about Paderewski? You may be wondering. I myself wasn't aware of his many accomplishments until pretty recently. I've been familiar with his name my whole life because I grew up in Poland on a street named after him. But all I really knew about him was that he'd been some sort of concert pianist. But then, last year, I started to read up on him. And let me tell you, I was floored. It turned out he wasn't just some sort of concert pianist. He was the best concert pianist of the early 1900s. And not only that, but he was known internationally. During his 50-plus years of performing, he played on every continent and in every U.S. state, drawing the largest crowds in history. Paderewski was probably the first global celebrity of pop culture. He was a household name at the time, appearing on all sorts of merchandise, from soaps and shampoos to candies and oatmeals to toys. He was featured on the cover of Time magazine twice. He appeared in the 1937 film Moonlight Sonata. And in 1953, he was referenced in a movie written by children's book author Dr. Seuss. And almost 20 years after his death, he was awarded his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The interesting thing is Paderewski had no true formal piano instruction until he was in his 20s. Born in 1860 in what was then Russian-occupied Poland and what is now Ukraine, he was drawn to the piano almost as soon as he could walk. But the only teacher within reasonable distance of where the Paderewskis lived was an old violinist who, unfortunately, wasn't very good at his job. He spent most of the lessons having Paderewski play duets with his older sister, Antonina. This is what Paderewski has to say about it in his memoirs. Sometimes our performances were very exciting, especially when we fought each other with our elbows, which we generally did very vigorously, accompanied by sudden little kicks as well. In fact, our duet playing was very often more acrobatic than musical. So even as a child, Paderewski knew that his teacher could not teach him proper piano technique, but that was just fine with him because it meant he didn't have to spend hours practicing. He could just sit at the piano improvising. However, this deficiency in his early piano technique later did become a source of great distress and frustration for him. When he was 12, he was accepted into the Warsaw Conservatory, where his teachers, upon seeing his lack of proper piano technique, promptly discouraged him from becoming a pianist and urged him to become a composer instead, stating that he didn't have the hands for piano playing. So Paderewski studied composition and learned to play various instruments, and even became quite adept at the trombone. One teacher is quoted as having said to him, "Now, my dear boy, listen to me. You are always trying to play piano. But why? Piano is useless for you. You have no future with the piano. Your future is here playing the trombone. Yes, your future is with the trombone. Mark well my words. Now, here is perhaps one of the secrets behind the magnetism of Paderewski's personality. From the time he was a child, he was driven by an inner conviction, like a fire burning within him, that he would attain something, that he would become somebody. In his memoirs, he writes, I felt from the beginning a certain line of destiny that must be pursued. So, although he dedicated himself to the trombone at the suggestion of his teacher, and although he began to doubt his future at the piano, Paderewski never quite gave up his dreams of becoming a career pianist. He writes of a moment in his early 20s when this became a deep conviction, a reality never to be shaken again. He was absolutely determined to succeed, despite all the discouragement he'd received. Now, it was around this time that Paderewski went for a short vacation to the Tatra Mountains in Poland. And what happened next, I think, illustrates that when you set your mind on something, when you absolutely commit to a specific trajectory, opportunities begin arising which help you get there. And so it was with Paderewski's musical career, all thanks to a chance meeting in the resort town of Zakopane with the legendary Polish actress Helena Modrzejewska. Paderewski stated that his meeting her when he was a poor unknown student was a real turning point in his career. Modrzejewska was famous for her Shakespearean roles and had a successful and very profitable career in the United States in the 1880s, dividing her time between her estate in California and her villa in Zakopane. She was enthralled by Paderewski's piano playing and urged him to pursue a career as a pianist. Paderewski, however, felt that he needed to study more, and his dream was to study under the famous Theodore Leschetizky, a Polish pianist and composer who lived in Vienna and was the leading piano teacher of his time. So, Modrzejewska helped Paderewski organize a concert to realize this dream, volunteering to recite poetry during the concert in Krakow. Her name on the program was Magic, Paderewski wrote. Her celebrity status filled the hall and brought in an enormous sum of money, which Paderewski was then able to use to travel to Vienna and study under Leschetizky, who, by the way, was also not very encouraging of Paderewski's piano playing, telling him that he could have been a great pianist if only he'd begun to study earlier, which Paderewski said was heartbreaking to hear. He was 24 at the time and had to start from the very beginning with finger exercises. But he persisted, practicing for 10 to 12 hours a day. Once he was supposed to go away for a weekend with friends, but declined at the last moment, stating that he needed to work on a piece he was trying to master. When his friends returned on Sunday, they found him lying unconscious by the piano, having literally practiced until he dropped. Paderewski's persistence paid off, though, and in 1888, 3 years after beginning his studies with Leschetizky, he made his Vienna debut, followed by performances in Paris, London, New York City. His career took off, and he took the world by storm. Paderewski crossed the Atlantic as well as the continent of North America more than 30 times, giving over 1,500 concerts in the US alone. On his tours of the US, Paderewski would travel in his own Pullman carriage, And wherever he arrived, he was welcomed by official delegations and crowds of ardent fans. And he loved his audiences as much as they loved him. Once, when a train from Montana was delayed by a snowstorm, Paderewski waited for the arriving audience before starting his concert. And after his recitals, he gladly obliged his fans and played encore after encore for hours. Much like Beatlemania swept the world in the second half of the 20th century, the first half of it was decidedly marked by Pattymania. Women, especially, went wild for Paderewski. His stage presence was incredible, and his powerful piano technique, coupled with his good looks and his wild mop of red hair, transformed him into something of an icon. There were times when he had to fend off female fans who came at him with scissors in the hopes of securing a lock of his hair as a souvenir. At one concert in 1894, at least a dozen ladies had to be carried out in a fainting condition during Paderewski's performance. One critic remarked that the long haired pianist has the same effect on New York women as a jar of confiture has on children in the orphanage. Some New York ladies actually embroidered their stockings with musical phrases from Paderewski's minuet. So, in every sense of the word, Paderewski was a rock star 50 years before the term was even coined. Except he played classical music rather than rock and roll. Paderewski became the leading interpreter of Chopin and Liszt, and his renditions of Bach and Beethoven also drew acclaim. In addition, he performed his own pieces. By the end of his life, he had written over 70 orchestral, instrumental, and vocal works, as well as an opera about life in the Polish Tatra Mountains, titled Monru. Monru premiered in 1902 at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, while at the exact same time, Paderewski himself was playing a concert at Carnegie Hall, in essence, competing against himself. But both venues were filled to capacity. Interestingly, Monru is the only Polish opera ever to be performed during the Metropolitan Opera's 135 years of history. Of course, Paderewski had his critics, one of whom referred to him as blacksmith of the piano rather than a genius virtuoso because of his powerful manner of striking the keys. And another Polish pianist and composer, upon hearing Paderewski for the first time but not knowing who he was, said, "Yes, he plays well, I suppose, but he's no Paderewski." Paderewski's talent and fame obviously brought him large sums of money. During one tour that lasted less than 6 months, he earned $250,000, making him the highest paid musician in the world up to that time. Which brings us to the next facet of Paderewski's life. Because aside from being a world famous composer and pianist, he was also an extremely generous philanthropist and humanitarian. Paderewski donated substantial portions of his wealth to numerous causes, such as for orphans and veterans, for Polish composers in Poland, for maternity wards and rehabilitation centers, for scholarships for young musicians, for Jewish refugees from Germany, and many more. In the 1920s, he turned over the proceeds from a concert series to purchase food for unemployed Americans. He donated $28,600 to disabled American veterans. And in 1932, he played for an audience of 16,000 in Madison Square Garden, donating the proceeds of $50,000 to unemployed American musicians. He even paid for his own ticket to the concert. Paderewski also sponsored the building of monuments, including the Washington Arch in New York in 1892. But that is not all. What many people don't know about Paderewski is how much he contributed to the fight for Polish independence. When he was born in 1860, Poland did not exist on the map, as it had been partitioned by its neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, beginning in 1772. So, as Paderewski was growing up, he was constantly surrounded with talk of revolution. In fact, there was an uprising in 1863 and 64 against Russian rule, and his father, because of his ties to it, was arrested right in front of 4-year-old Ignaz's eyes. This, of course, made a very deep impression on the boy, and probably contributed to that inner force which compelled him to attain something, to become somebody, especially somebody who would help Poland. Paderewski stated that even at the age of 7, his goal was to help liberate his country. That was over and above all my artistic aspirations, he wrote. Then, when he was 10, he read about the famous Battle of Grunwald, one of the largest ever to be fought in medieval Europe, and which for Poland was a major victory over the Teutonic Knights. 10-year-old Paderewski, when he read about this battle, conceived the idea that for the 500th anniversary of it, which would take place 40 years from then, he would erect a monument to commemorate that anniversary. And you know what? He did exactly that. The monument was erected in Krakow 4 years before the outbreak of World War I. And the unveiling of it became a great patriotic demonstration at which Paderewski spoke to over 150,000 people gathered there and captured their hearts with his passionate speech. Paderewski emerged as a leading champion for Poland's independence. He dedicated himself to the cause so completely that for the next few years, he gave up his concert tours altogether and instead kept up a very demanding schedule of public appearances and meetings. In the United States, he spoke in public and on the radio, appealing to Americans to remember the fate of his nation and asking Polish immigrants to prepare themselves for the moment when their motherland would need their help. During World War I, as the United States representative for the Polish National Committee, Paderewski urged President Wilson to support the cause for Polish independence. And President Wilson included this as one of his famous 14 points, the principles of the peace negotiations to end the war. Paderewski was later chosen as head of the Polish delegation to the Paris Peace Conference, and so he was present for the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. He then became prime minister of the newly independent Poland. And although he resigned this post 10 months later, he continued to represent his country abroad at international conferences, where he was the only delegate to not require a translator, as he was fluent in 7 languages. So, as you can see, Paderewski was truly instrumental in helping secure independence for Poland after 123 years of it not existing. About Paderewski's deep patriotism, one of his friends wrote, "Words came from his lips, sometimes so soft, so soothing as the songs of the nightingale hovering over the head of a Polish farmer working in the soil. The message to love Poland, all of Poland, with her centuries old history, with her beautiful nature, the tragedy of her triple partitions, with her heroism and faith and hope in a better future. In 1941, Paderewski witnessed quite a moving tribute to his life as U.S. cities hosted a Paderewski Week in honor of the 50th anniversary of his first American tour. He died later that year in New York City at the age of 80. His funeral in St. Patrick's Cathedral was attended by over 4,000 people inside the church, including leaders of the political and musical worlds, as well as a crowd of 35,000 people outside. President Roosevelt issued a special decree which allowed his body to be laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. Paderewski's wish had been to be buried in free Poland, something that, due to the outbreak of World War II and the ensuing reign of communism, would not be possible for the next 50 years. His wish was finally granted in 1992. On his final journey home, Paderewski was accompanied by a delegation which included President George H.W. Bush, who formally delivered the remains to President Lech Wałęsa during a moving ceremony in Warsaw. Paderewski is buried in the royal crypt of St. John's Cathedral. Paderewski's heart, however, remains in the U.S., literally. Following his sister's wishes, it was removed after his death, just like that of his idol, Chopin, and it is now encased in a bronze sculpture at the National Shrine of Our Lady of Częstochowa in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Because as much as Paderewski loved Poland, he also loved the United States, referring to it in his memoirs as America, the country of my heart, my second home. Today in the U.S., there are music festivals held annually in his honor, including in the California town of Paso Robles, where Paderewski owned a ranch, and, on top of everything else, started a vineyard, the wines from his grapes even winning several awards. He was, as the French composer Camille Saint-Saëns described him, a genius who happened to play the piano. So it certainly has been no easy feat to try to distill the remarkable life and legacy of Ignacy Jan Paderewski into such a short presentation. I feel like what I've offered you is just the tip of the iceberg. So if you're interested in reading and finding out more, I have a list of sources I used posted on my website, www.magdalenabartkowska.com, where you can also get the first 2 chapters of my immigration memoir. Here is a book written by one of Paderewski's living blood relatives, Colleen Jan Paderewski, who she actually accompanied her cousin on his final journey to Poland in 1992. So this is her first-hand account of that. And the Paderewski memoirs, which he prepared together with his editor, Mary Lawton. These are an amazing source of material. You can really hear Paderewski's distinctive voice, especially as he recalls some quite humorous anecdotes, one of which I'd like to share with you now. So Paderewski is describing a concert very early in his career. There was no piano to be had except a very old instrument, the hammers of which were in a pitiable condition. They would respond to the touch by lifting easily, but alas, they would not fall back again. They remained immovable in the air. It is impossible to describe the agony of this. "This is horrible," I cried to the violinist who was standing by. "We must do something. I can never play even one piece on this piano." It was a dreadful moment. I was in a frenzy. There was with us a young student who had come along on the tour just for fun. He was with us at this crucial moment and eager to help. "Wait, I have a plan, an idea," he said. "When you begin to play, I will stand close to the piano and push the hammers down just as quickly as they go up. I don't think the audience will really notice. I can do it so quickly." Well, it was certainly an ingenious idea, and our last resort, and we had to do something, so we agreed to it and hoped for some good results. We began the concert, my friend standing close to the piano, pushing down the hammers as quickly as they flew up into the air. You should have seen him. His hands went like lightning. They flew like birds from side to side. He had to lean way across the piano. Back and forth he weaved and darted in constant motion. What an experience! It was a race between us, and try as he would, he could never quite keep up with me. The piano always came out victor. After the concert was over, I hurried out and mingled with the crowd, for I was, I confess, curious to hear their comments. They gathered in groups, excitedly discussing the concert. "And how," one asked, "did you like that young pianist?" "Oh, very well. He was all right. But the other one, the second pianist who was playing at the back of the piano, he was the best, I think, and he worked much harder than the other. He was the real artist, make no mistake." And finally, the very last thing I'd like to leave you with is the good news that Patty Mania, which swept the world over 100 years ago, is making a comeback. Check out this new video from the musical theater in Poznań promoting a musical about Paderewski, which was supposed to premiere this fall, but I'm not sure what will be happening with that due to the current events. But anyway, check it out. It is one of the best things you'll see this year. I guarantee it. Thank you so much for listening. Do widzenia.